Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. And today I'm going to be speaking with Maya van Rossum, founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations. Roxanne and I were on last week where we reviewed what was going on at the Roundhouse, and we'll be back probably next week because it's not real easy to schedule these things during sessions. But I'm really happy to have Maya here. It's a very timely conversation. If you're driving around in your car today and you don't catch all of today's show, you can watch today's show and all of our past shows by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on the actions and events page, and you'll see a link there to Retake Conversations, and Maya's and my conversation should be at the very top, and it'll be posted probably tomorrow morning by 10 in the morning, so you can get it there. We'll get to our discussion in just a minute, but I've got a couple of quick announcements I need to make, and I gotta turn the page here. Okay, I want to first acknowledge that we are having this show on stolen Tewa land, and we want to acknowledge the Tewa people for their stewardship of the land for decades, centuries, millennium, so thank you for that and for letting us share your land. I want to remind you that Retake Our Democracy has a 2021 legislative strategy, 20 transformational bills, one of which we'll be talking about in just a minute, and 28 priority bills for which we are advocating. And we started the advocacy work the day after the general election, and our strategy was to use December and January to have like initial conversations with senators and legislators about the bills we cared about. And part of why we did this was to surface the kinds of issues and concerns, often based on misinformation and lobbyist conversation and so forth, so that we would have time to get to the truth and get to our legislators with timely information to help them understand the bills from our perspective. If you're interested in being part of our advocacy effort, which also includes a daily alert that Roxanne sends out that will tell you everything about the bills that are coming in the next couple of days, including, when, how to log on, how to hear them, how to watch them, how to weigh in with voice, by your voice with either phone calls or emails, and offering public comment. And all of those alerts include links to summaries of the bills that have speaking points for you, so you can do this quickly and in an informed way. If you're interested in more information on this work, I highly recommend that you participate in our 3:30 to 4:30 Friday afternoon legislative huddles. And we're recording this show at 2:45. So we got to get it over with on Friday. So we got to get done with it so that we can get it to the radio station so I can get ready for the 3:30 meeting. And Maya, she has nothing to do. So there's no worry.
I have to be on that 3:30 meeting too. Although it'll be 5:30 where I am.
That's right. She's from the East Coast there. And these sessions at 3:30 are really helpful. We call them a huddle. And for even the most uninitiated to the Roundhouse process, you start to get a sense of who the players are, where the problems are. You get to know your legislature, and what you get to do also is learn how the legislative process really works. Not how you learned it in middle school and high school, but how it really works. And so in doing so, you become much more capable as a lobbyist yourself. So do join us, and we always publicize those. In fact, all you have to do is go to the retakeourdemocracy.org website and click on actions and events, and it's right at the top because it's a weekly meeting, and so the link is always there and current. So that's about as much as I want to talk about right now. I want to give Maya a chance to talk. I did that in under 5 minutes. So Maya, welcome back. This is like the third time I've had you on the show. And despite the fact that you have been on twice before. I always like to let our guests introduce themselves in case we've got a new listener out there. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you found yourself founding the Green Amendment.
So thank you so much, Paul. I'm just thrilled to be back on your show. It's one of my favorite places to be. And, and really, I just want to say to people, joining your huddles really is, it's really interesting. It's really exciting. It's really engaging, and it's really empowering. So I love them. I have been doing environmental advocacy and litigation for nearly 30 years now on behalf of the beautiful Delaware River on the East Coast, working in 4 states and at the national level. And long story short, in our anti-fracking efforts and our efforts to protect our beautiful Delaware River watershed from fracking operations to extract gas from shale, we ended up pursuing a really powerful legal argument that ensured that the people of Pennsylvania had an enforceable constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. The provision had existed in the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights for over 4 decades, but had been largely ignored by the courts and the legislators. And in the course of this litigation, we breathed legal life into that long ignored provision. That was back in 2013. When I realized and recognized the power of what we had done to not just protect our beautiful Delaware River from dangerous industrial operations, but to really give to the people of Pennsylvania an enforceable constitutional right to a healthy environment, and how transformative that was in terms of litigation, in terms of advocacy, in terms of environmental protection efforts. I realized and recognized that we needed these kinds of constitutional environmental rights amendments in every state across our nation, that there was only one other state that had such an amendment, and that was Montana. And so I wrote a book called The Green Amendment, and I started speaking with people and on wonderful shows like this. And an amazing gentleman in the state of New Mexico, Mike Neese, heard me, and he called me up. And in early 2019, that is when I first started talking with the people of New Mexico about advancing this idea in your state. And it's just been rolling powerfully ever since.
Well, that's, yeah, and I remember I was reluctant to get too engaged in it. We were so busy, and we're always busy. It's a complaint, lame, but so excited that I wound up getting re-engaged, and I'm part of the steering committee and so forth. And it's been an exciting process. Well, you've pretty much covered the second question as to what a Green Amendment is. And Maya doesn't like to look at the questions in advance, so she just goes in the direction she wants to go, which is fun. And since you can't see it, you can't see the bubbling enthusiasm with which she conveys this. But if you watch the podcast, you will. So as some of our listeners know, I'm on the steering committee for the Green Amendment, which now has a new name, the SJR3, the Environmental Rights Act. Can you tell us what this bill would do and how, where we are with it right now?
So it's New Mexico, as a result of our engagement with the people of New Mexico, including yourself, Paul, Native American communities, and activists of all kind, and looking at the powerful language Pennsylvania and Montana had, we actually have developed a very New Mexico specific provision, but that includes all of the most powerful elements essential for a true constitutional green amendment, environmental rights amendment. And what it would do is it would recognize and protect the rights of all the people of New Mexico to a clean and healthy environment, including pure water, clean air, a stable climate, to the natural, scenic, cultural, and healthful qualities of the environment. It would ensure that all levels of government in the state of New Mexico realized and recognized that they were the trustee of the natural resources of New Mexico, and that they were duty bound to protect these resources for the benefit of all the people, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, geography, or generation, and that they in fact had to protect these resources for present and future generations. So it's very powerful. It's also really elegant and very meaningful.
Okay. Well, Retake has been conducting constituent senator Zoom conversations throughout December and January. And from them, we've gleaned some of the concerns about the Green Amendment or the Civil Rights Act. I'm sorry, or the Environmental Rights Act. And one of which is that it would be covered already by Speaker Egal's bill, HB4, which is the Civil Rights Act, or by another bill, HB 50, the Private Right to Action, both of which afford New Mexicans some opportunity for action if their environmental rights are abridged. Can you talk about the differences between these bills and why the SJR3 Environmental Rights Act is still very important?
So the truth is, in New Mexico, without the passage of SJR3 and a vote of the people of New Mexico to add an environmental rights amendment to Article 2 of the New Mexico Constitution, the people of New Mexico may have a right to a healthy environment in their hearts and their minds, but they don't actually have an enforceable right legally because it is not protected in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution. The current language in Article 20, Section 21, that talks about a healthy environment as being of fundamental importance to the health, safety, and public interests of the people of New Mexico is nice language, but it doesn't have the legal strength that the proposed environmental rights amendment would have. And in fact, it is focused on having the legislators control pollution and despoilment of the environment, not prevent harm before it even starts or remedying it after you have a problem, which is what the Environmental Rights Amendment added to Article 2 would do. The Civil Rights Act that has been proposed does not create an environmental right for the people of New Mexico. It actually speaks to all of the constitutional rights that the people currently have and says if those rights are violated, that there is a new pathway for enforcement for the people. But it does not speak directly to environmental rights. It speaks to the Constitution and constitutional language. The private right of action legislation is really about adding a new opportunity for enforcing the environmental laws that the people of New Mexico have on the books right now. And that is powerful and that is important. You know, environmental protection laws that we have in New Mexico and beyond are an important part of the solution, but they are very focused, right? Usually on one area of natural resource, water or air. They're focused on one kind of industry. They're focused on managing through permitting the quantity and placement of pollution and degradation that's allowed to happen. They are not focused on preventing harm. They are not focused on really advancing environmental justice. They don't ensure consideration of cumulative impacts and impacts to environmental justice communities or Native American communities and seek to prevent harm first. All of which are the kinds of things you're going to get from an environmental rights amendment. So having stronger enforcement of the water, air, hazardous sites laws that New Mexico and New Mexicans have is important, but it's not going to solve the wealth of environmental problems that you are still experiencing, despite the fact that you have all of these environmental laws, because there is something really important missing from the environmental protection structure in New Mexico and in every other state across the nation. And it is the right of the people recognized in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution to a clean and healthy environment. And that's what SJR 3 seeks to advance. And it's not that the legislators ultimately are going to pass this environmental rights amendment. From a process perspective, passage through both houses of the legislature during this 60-day session will mean that the people of New Mexico are the ones that are going to ultimately decide whether they want constitutional environmental rights. SJR 3 is about giving the people the opportunity to decide. And that's powerful and important.
Okay, yeah, I have to take a little break here. I want to remind our listeners that it is in times like these, when we're sequestered in our homes for what seems like a decade, that KSFR is more important than ever. It offers timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you sort of sane while you're holed up at home. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and think of it as your ticket for admission to a whole wealth of welcome programming. Just go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button and make a donation if you can possibly do so. Today, I'm speaking with Maya von Rossum, and she's the founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations. And we're talking about her legislative amendment, basically, or a bill, a joint resolution that's in the legislature right now. It's in the Senate Rules Committee. And if passed, it would allow, as Maya was just articulating, voters to be able to vote on whether or not they want their environmental right. They want the right to clean air and clean water. It seems utterly absurd that this even needs to be discussed and introduced. And I kind of enjoy how opponents have to waltz around like actually saying that they're opposed to clean water. You know, instead they'll ask you, well, what is clean? You know, well, how do you define that? We may get to that question a little bit later on. We've also heard from Republicans that this would lead to frivolous lawsuits or expensive judgments that rural communities simply could not afford. Can you address those concerns? You sort of disappeared.
Yes, I can. And I went and got my numbers. I know I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I just wanted to get some numbers for you.
Okay.
So couple of things. First off, just like other Article 2 rights, when there is a constitutional violation, and there is a legal challenge that demonstrates that there has been a violation of the constitutional rights that are protected in Article 2 of the New Mexico Constitution, the remedy is to solve the problem. The remedy is to stop the violation. So in the environmental context, what that means is if there are regulations that are passed that, if implemented, will result in, really critical volumes of pollution going into a waterway or a community, so much so we can see based on the science that it will infringe on the rights of the people to clean water or clean air, and you have a constitutional challenge that's victorious, the remedy is to not implement the regulations. If there's a permit that's issued where the impacts on the community weren't properly considered and the environmental rights of the people therefore weren't properly protected, then, and that's proven in a legal challenge, the remedy is to not have that permit go forth until the problem is fixed. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a site long contaminated with TCE, a dangerous toxin. For over 30 years, the government has done nothing to clean up this toxic site and has actually been working to advance a development project on it. We've been challenging it, saying the failure to act to clean it up is a constitutional violation. What's the remedy? To say that government must act in a way that will ensure the site gets cleaned up and restore the right. It doesn't tell them how to do it, but in fact, there are responsible parties with deep pockets that can be held accountable for that cleanup. So we're talking about equitable remedies, not money damages when you have a constitutional violation, right? So we're not talking about about big payouts. And in terms of frivolous lawsuits, in Pennsylvania and New Mexico, the two states that have a green amendment of this kind, zero frivolous lawsuits filed and dismissed by the courts. When you're talking about the very serious and important lawsuits that have been filed to address real problems in the state, even there we don't see an onslaught. In Pennsylvania, since that 2013 landmark victory that I talked about over 7 years ago, we've only had 62 cases that cited Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment, and 52 where it was really the, a key basis of the litigation. And in Montana, in over 49 years, because their Environmental Rights Amendment has been legally viable in all that time, 134 cases citing it, 89 cases where it was a fundamentally important part of the legal claims. That is not an onslaught. Those are important, reasonable, valuable cases designed to remedy important, serious concerns.
Okay, well, so speaking of, you sort of tried to redefine what an onslaught was. In the hearing that we had last week, I believe it was Wednesday, a couple of the Republican senators were, of course, in support, but we're kind of concerned about things like how would you be able to tell what clean air was? And one of them was espousing how, well, are we going to sue the wind because of dust? And how do you define pure water? And then I thought you had an excellent response to that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So, all language in Article 2 of the New Mexico Bill of Rights is broad, right? So, I can sort of turn to you, look at another right. What is the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures? What is unreasonable? What about the right to speak freely? What is to speak freely, right? These are all broad terms that define the rights that the people want protected from government infringement. And what has happened is over time, after those rights were placed in the amendment, either from the beginning or somewhere along the way, they got definition. And they got definition by first the legislative and the executive branches taking actions, passing legislation, passing regulations to seek to implement them. And then the people either agreed with their definition and let the laws and the regulations and the implementation stand, or in certain circumstances, they had a real concern and they could see how that action was resulting in an overreach and infringement, and they brought a legal challenge. And then the very capable justices of the New Mexico courts weighed in, used their talents as judges and standard principles of statutory and constitutional interpretation, and they helped. They reviewed what the legislative and the executive branch did, and either said, "Yep, you got it right," or they said, "You know what? There's a problem here, and you have an infringement, and it needs to be fixed." One of the beautiful things about the Green Amendment proposal in New Mexico, as exists in Pennsylvania and Montana, is it identifies the state as the trustee of the natural resources for the benefit of all the people. And that trustee language is actually very clearly defined over time in New Mexico law, in laws generally, and brings with it some very clear guidance, procedural guidance and substantive guidance. So having that trustee language in the New Mexico Green Amendment goes a long way to really help people clearly, legislators, regulators, and others, clearly understand what their duties are when it comes to implementation of the Green Amendment.
Okay. Well, you've had that's actually been a really important discussion we've been having of late about the trusteeship and so forth. Well, you've had your first hearing in the Senate rules, and actually you didn't get through it because they ran out of time, and so the discussion was held over. And then in the time that the discussion was held over, we ran into a problem with one of the there was the discussion about whether it should be amended. And I know that we don't want to get into the details of what is being discussed behind closed doors, but I'm sure this is something you've encountered in the past. What are some of the things that, you've got a bill, you put it forward, and then all of a sudden somebody has a good idea as to how to improve it or maybe dilute it? And so how do you manage that? And what are some of the things you think about when you see an amendment? Okay, Maya, are you going to answer?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. And I think that there are, some really, yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
keep
now I hear
talking
you.
until you say you
We're
can hear
having,
me.
by the way, folks,
Give
we're
me a
having a
thumbs
little
up.
bit of difficulty with the internet.
Great.
Go, Maya. Maya,
So,
go.
in New Mexico, as you know, right, as so often happens when you're trying to get constitutional amendments or legislation or regulations advanced, people really come together before there is this proposal, and they work really hard to get the language exactly right. And with the Green Amendment, we worked really hard to make sure that this was the right language for the people of New Mexico, that all communities, regardless of race and ethnicity and wealth, were protected, that the unique and important priorities for a healthy environment that Indigenous communities have, that they were captured in this Green Amendment language, right? And so the language, again, it really is very powerful and very elegant and spot on. And we all feel that way. But yes, as you said, there has been, there's always reaction, but there has been kind of a counter proposal. And one of the most important things when that happens is to not lose your mind too quickly, right? You've worked so hard to get your proposal just right. And so when somebody comes back with a counter, it can be really easy to have a knee-jerk upset reaction of, I don't want to see it. You can't possibly improve upon what we've done here. But the truth is, when you take the time to step back and really look at what's being offered, you can always find some really important nuggets in there. Sometimes it really is improvements, right? It's a different way of saying or seeing something that is an enhancement. Sometimes it's not an improvement, but it helps you identify questions and concerns that need to be addressed, right? It's really important. Just as you don't do a knee-jerk reaction of rejection, you also can't do this knee-jerk reaction of assuming the other people got it right and you were wrong. And that can also be kind of easy to be like, oh my gosh, I have to change this exactly the way they want, or we're going to lose the vote. That's not true either. So it's important to take it in, take a deep breath, find the good things, understand the problems, understand the concerns. When you can combine what you've proposed with what's being offered in some helpful way, do it. And if ideas that are being offered are not helpful, like removing the trust language from the proposed Green Amendment and trying to weaken it with unclear language like stewardship, understand that you really got it right and you need to stick to your guns on that important issue, but not necessarily all of the issues that